Hello and welcome to an episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name is Jacob and today we're taking a look at the 6.5-inch scale Kong Skull Island figure from Playmates Toys. The exciting thing about this figure and Playmates Toys in general is that this line of toys is the only one that we've really ever gotten here in Australia that just kind of shows up in general stores. Like I found these things in K-Mart. Well, there's a bit of a story behind that, but like I couldn't find them at my local K-Mart, but other people have, and it's just this whole thing where it's really great because we've never really gotten a line of Godzilla figures that you could just go in and pick up from a normal store here in Australia, aside from like specialty comic book stores where you might be able to find a NECA figure or two. But generally, these sort of figures are really hard to come by here in Australia, and it's so refreshing to be able to like walk into a Kmart and just find these in the normal toy section. So that's the exciting thing about these figures. And specifically today, we're looking at probably my favorite figure of the lot, at least the ones that I have on hand so far, and that is the Kong from Kong Skull Island figure that they put out. Specifically this scale one, because I already did a full review, or kind of like a really loose review, of the 11-inch scale version of this figure with the open mouth, and I wasn't a big fan of that one. It looked really cheesy and toy-like. But this figure in particular, I actually really like him. I think they did a really good job with the sculpt, especially the face sculpt. You can see these figures are generally made as very toy-like figures. These aren't like collectibles in the traditional sense where they're not like Monster Arts or even NECA figures or they're designed for adult collectors. These are made for children. They're pretty cheap and they're made cheaply. So I'm not going to be too harsh on this one because of that. Originally, I expected that these figures would be sort of like Bandai vinyl type figures, that there would be Sofubi figures, you know, hollow vinyl. But it turns out that they're actually mostly made of hard plastic. For example, this guy here, aside from his face and I think his feet, the rest of him is made of this hard plastic. So I don't know if you can hear that. I'll just bring it to the microphone. That's what it's like when I tap on his chest. That's really interesting that these guys are actually made really differently from what I was expecting they would be. So hard plastic, although his face is made of a more rubbery type plastic, and his feet as well. And I think his arms are actually both made of a more sort of rubbery type plastic. Before we get into the figure himself, because I am getting a bit ahead of myself, let's talk about the box that he comes with. So, fortunately, or rather, in my case, unfortunately, I'd say, I do actually have two of this guy, because I ordered these guys from the K-Mart website, and they were posted to me like they arrived like 2 days later from a fairly local store, because my actual local one didn't have any in stock at the time, and I just wanted them. I didn't want to have to go to every store to hunt them down. So even though it kind of breaks the spirit of things, considering I wanted to find these in store, I still bought them online. So, yeah. They were still really cheap though, which is a great thing. But they sent them as assorted figures, so I couldn't make sure that I got the figures that I wanted. So they like sent them randomly. And I ended up getting two of these Kong figures instead of like a Gigan figure, for example. But that gives us the benefit of being able to see this guy in the box. The boxes themselves are this sort of Bandai King series style box where they have, you know, the big cardboard box with the figure kind of zip tied into it. Very typical box. Although I do like the back of this box where they do have that scene from Kong Skull Island, that bit of concept art. It looks really nice here. But again, on the front of the box, like I talked about in my previous review of the big Kong, they just got a stock image of that thing and it looks really... I don't like the look of it. He looks like a Sasquatch or something, as opposed to the actual Kong from the film, which is a bit distracting. I think the packaging is okay. I would again prefer a tag as to these big boxes, because now I'm left with the situation that either I throw away these boxes and I feel kind of bad as a collector to be throwing away boxes, or I have to find space to hold these fucking big ass boxes for these really cheap, crappy... Well, this one's not crappy, but a lot of these ones are pretty crappy figures. So that's the kind of spot that I'm in. But that's enough about this box. Let's get to the figure himself. Honestly, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised with this guy, especially since I wasn't overly thrilled with the stock images of him that I saw online. He just looked really plain, but actually seeing him in person is really nice. What I like most about this figure is his face sculpt. They actually seem to have gotten a really decent and detailed face sculpt for him that actually really captures what he looked like in the film. Now, it's not perfect, it's really sort of simplified and smoothed over in that sort of typical way, which I don't know why they keep doing these with these sorts of figures. I feel like if they really wanted to, they could add much crisper detail to this stuff. Like, even the fur texture on him, well, it's alright, it feels really... I don't know, it feels like they 3D printed him and just didn't bother like sculpting any more detail into him, and they just kind of left it at that and just smoothed it all out, and it feels really sort of processed and smoothed over, like across his whole body. The texturing is a bit subpar. However, compared to some of the other figures in this Playmates line, they definitely did a lot better in terms of the detail work. Just, again, especially the face there, where you can actually see the subtlety, and they really captured the expression of this Kong, and even the motion capture actor who portrayed this Kong, you can even kind of see a bit of the soul in his eyes, if that makes sense, which is really, really nice and really sweet the way they did that. So I really like that aspect to him. His body, on the other hand, I feel it's a little bit clunky feeling, actually. So I'll just adjust the focus so you can see him from a little bit more of a distance. But he feels a little bit clunky. Again, he is a toy figure, so like the audience for this guy is children, so it's not that big a deal. But I find that the transitions where the joints, especially for like the arms, are a bit off. I feel like his torso is a bit too broad, and it just, there's something about him that could be a little bit more elegant. That I remember the Kong from this film feeling a little bit slimmer and more elegant than this guy here. Which again, isn't the worst thing in the world, but it just makes the little details of his face kind of not fit as well as they could. And I'm actually curious whether they actually used the specific CGI data from the film, or whether he was 3D printed and designed from the ground up by an artist over at Playmates Toys, because I find that all the detail across his body and his arms and his fur is like a mirror image. But if we look at like the detailing here, like every single line and dot of fur on both his left and right side of his body here, for example, and even just like the lines in his chest here, and the fur up near the one of his neck, it's totally a mirror image on either side, which looks really, I don't know, it feels like it's very robotically made because of that, and you can kind of see the same thing on his back, though it is less noticeable there. It's not too bad on his back. I see a little bit of variety, but especially on the front, it looks really like copied and pasted over. There you get a good little look at his face there. So paint-wise, even though this guy's not really stellar, they pretty much just went with brown and gray all over him. They did do a much better job with this guy than they did with the big, massive version of him, which is really surprising. So I will bring in the massive version to compare in a little bit. But you can see they did just put all his fleshy areas like his chest and his hands and his feet and his face with gray, which is very accurate to the film. They added a little bit of orange for his eyes, which, despite the fact that it's just very plain orange, it actually looks pretty good in person because he is a very small figure. His actual face sculpt is fairly small, so it does do the job. And then the rest they just did with this very flat sort of brown color. I don't think there's any variant in it, but it does the job. So it is a nice paint job for what it is, especially just being a toy figure like this. So I have definitely seen worse, so I'm not really going to complain about it. And they added a couple of slash marks on his chest with like a gray paint, so that's pretty effective for what it is. Even though I do wish they could have actually sculpted that in a little bit, kind of like they did with some of the other Kong Skull Island figures, but that's alright. He's got like basic Bandai vinyl articulation, if you know what I mean. Like his arms move 360 on those shoulder joints, no joints here or anything like that. His head actually feels like it's on a bit of a ball joint, so it kind of wiggles around, but his neck is so thick that you really can't do much with it there. It just kind of wobbles a little bit. But you can turn it 360 if you want to do something horrible to your Kong there. And his legs are a bit iffy. He's really hard to get to stand, actually. So right now I've got him where he just about stands, but it's like you move him a millimeter off on any of these joints and he's just going to topple over, because he doesn't really have any knee joints or anything like that. He just has these kind of weird joints here, which just, they just do that basically for his legs. So they actually stop there and stop there. You can't make them swivel all around, which is no big deal, but that's the range of motion for that joint there at his hip, and his feet just swivel all around. So he's actually really hard to get to stand, like I was saying, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that easily, because, yeah, he's one of those figures that's just an absolute pain to do that, so good luck with that. That kind of works, but again, if I poke him, he'll topple over there. So he's not really much of an articulated figure, though, you know, the arm movement's really where it's at, and it's good that you can turn his head side to side and all that sort of stuff, but, you know, it could be better. I at least wish there was a better way to get him to stand. So let's bring in the big Kong figure that I was talking about from earlier. You can see the vast size difference here. So this guy's meant to be in a 6.5 inch scale. I think he is closer to about 6 inches. I could be wrong. And this guy's meant to be about 11 inches tall. So actually they have almost identical body and arm and leg sculpts. It's just the faces that are different, but there is actually only a slight bit more detail on the big guy here than this little one, which is really interesting. You can tell just by the shape of the body, he has that same sort of slightly too wide body, I find, and all that sort of detailing. Strangely enough, even though the detailing is ever so slightly more detailed on the big guy, I actually prefer how it's detailed on the small guy. It feels more dense for the size of the figure, because even though this guy's really big, the amount of density of detail seems to be a little bit lower on this guy per, like, centimeter of plastic, if that makes sense. And then we get to the face sculpt, which, geez, I don't know how to really fit on camera, but there's something about this big guy's face that doesn't look all that great to me. It feels like a different person sculpted the face for this thing, whereas this face looks like it was taken right out of the film. It's just really odd. If you're like a collector and want to get one of these figures, I'd actually recommend the smaller one with the more sort of subtle face compared to the more expressive big one. This is more like better as a children's toy, I find. And also you can see they went a bit crazy with the black paint on him, on his chest and his hands and his feet, rather than the grey, which I think looks more accurate on this figure as well. Again, really poorly painted teeth on this guy, like I talked about in my other review of him. Before I jump to a full-on size comparison for this guy, I want to bring in a couple of other Kong figures that I happen to have lying around. The first of which is actually a pretty old Playmates King Kong. Ignore the little biplane that I have him holding there. It's not actually part of the set that came with him. He actually had like a weird, really creepy fish that he was punching. But this is one of the Kongs from the Peter Jackson's 2005 Kong film, and Playmates Figures did the line of figures for that film as well. So you can actually see two generations of Playmates Kongs. One thing that I find that's really bizarre about these figures is even though the new one has a more accurate look to him, he actually looks closer to what the Kong looked like in the film than what the Peter Jackson's one looked like. You can definitely see that the Peter Jackson's one is hand sculpted, like somebody actually physically got some clay and sculpted this thing and then they turned it into a figure, kind of like NECA does these days. However, this one looks very 3D printed, like he was probably made in like CAD or one of those sort of like 3D digital programs where you can sculpt in and then print it out. And it's really telling because the detailing, though more accurate on the newer one, feels flatter and just less fun and less impressive, and it pops less, I find, than this Peter Jackson's one. Like, you could see they put in lots of work. Like, this is made of a similar hard plastic, but there's so much more detail in him, and like the wash of gray that they put on him, and like the scarring in him with that pink and all that detail actually looks really good on this guy. So he's very expressive and it has a great texture to him. Even has the gimmick of like his arm, his arm can punch when you have the little lever on the back, so he's just like smashing this plane here like an absolute boss. But you can see this modern generation of Playmates figures, whereas like I love the face sculpt on him, but just overall as a figure there's something about this guy that feels smoother and less textured and like there's less physicality to him in that way that just makes him less playable. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I really wish that a lot of these figures would go back to the more textured kind of designs like this. And I've seen similar things with the recent Bandai vinyl figures as well, which is a bit of a shame. Even though, like, in general, I really like it when they do use the 3D print of the like actual film to make the figures come to life, but like really need to have the details be sharp for it to look good, kind of like NECA have done and Monster Arts have done with some of their figures. So like if we bring in the NECA 2019 Godzilla, he's actually got really decent sharp detailing. And you know, this is a cool little comparison because these two are going to be facing off in the next film. Kind of odd because this Godzilla is actually a little bit short compared to this guy, because this guy's more like 6 inches, he's approaching more like 6.5 inches. I could also bring in the bootleg of the Mezco Kong figure that they recently put out. The original Mezco figure is actually articulated, and it's kind of similar to a Monster Arts, and he's like 7 inches tall or something like that. And I have this like cheap bootleg of him that they somehow converted into a vinyl figure instead of that articulated figure. So you can kind of see the scaling of these two, because these two are actually really popular Kong figures at the moment. So a lot of people have this one in their collection, at least the original one. And I'm actually gonna be getting a version of this guy that is a bootleg of the articulated one. So I'm really keen to see how that one turns out. So I'll have more bootlegs of the Mezco Kong in the future videos. So that's just like a little interesting side thing for you guys. We can also maybe bring in another NECA figure, which might scale up a little better, which is the original Godzilla from the 1962 Godzilla, which did fight Kong back in that film. So you can see that these two actually don't scale up too badly. I think Godzilla's still a bit too short for this guy, especially when you're considering the suit actors and how like Godzilla's arms and shoulders should be pretty much even with Kong's arms and shoulders and stuff like that. But it's a fair comparison for these two. They're not too bad together. Before the full-size comparison montage, I'll just kind of do a little measuring of this guy. Let's see where he's at. He is like 16 to 17 centimeters tall, which translates to about 6.5, almost 7 inches. So that gives you guys an idea of how big this little Kong is. So yeah, let's jump into our size comparison montage and then we'll close off the review. There we go, guys. That's my full review of the Playmates Toys Kong Skull Island figure. I think he's actually surprisingly well done, especially compared to some of their other figures, and it really shows the sort of wasted potential, rather, I should say, from some of their other figures, like that Shin Godzilla that I actually kind of love. But you know what I mean. So I really wish they'd do more figures in this style. Like, I do have my gripes with it. I think it definitely can be better, but come on, for like a children's toy in this scale and for the price, it's totally worth it. And it's so cool that we're like getting these figures in stores like K-Mart here in Australia, which has just been unheard of up until now. So that's so awesome. So I do recommend this figure to you guys. He's actually a really decent version of this Kong. I think he stacks up as just as good as, if not better than, some of the actual official figures of this Kong. I mean, this is an official figure, but like the ones that came out when Kong Skull Island, the movie, came out in like 2017 or something. There's like that really massive version of him that looked really kind of goofy, and again, this guy, I think, is an even better representation of this particular version of Kong, which is really cool. Another figure I should just kind of throw in, just because I forgot to mention him earlier in the review, is the Star Ace Kong figure. So I'll kind of just bring him in, just so you guys can see the two compared to each other. So this is the Star Ace Kong, which is like a very X Plus style of figure. He's like X Plus quality, X Plus size, is like 30 centimeters tall, so you can see it's kind of an unfair comparison because this guy is a very good representation of this version of Kong, but you can kind of, I don't know how to fit these two in frame actually, hold on. There you got a kind of a comparison of what these two look like, and actually the smaller one here actually almost looks more accurate again with his face, but like the fur and the texture and the rest of the body and the size and all that is so much better on this figure. But again, this is like a $200 plus figure, so it's not really fair to be comparing the two. But I thought I'd just chuck this in because this is the only other version of this particular design of Kong that I have in my collection, and he's probably the best one. So it would be a little unfair to not compare the two, or a little bit of a missed opportunity. So there you guys go. It's a little bit of a clunky comparison, but surprisingly the face sculpt on this guy really holds up, even against this guy here. The body, not even close, but yeah, it's not too bad either. Again, I still recommend this guy for the price, for what he is. He is a really well done figure, especially if you want to customize this guy. I think that would be really cool if you did a really detailed paint job on him. And maybe if you wanted to customize the fur or something like that. I don't know, guys. I don't know. Just I like this figure. So yeah, that is about it for this review. Thank you so much for watching. May all your vinyl be a radiated vinyl. Over and out. Bye.